All right, so this is going to be a review on the Earthwing Earthwang. So I don't usually do gear reviews. I usually don't do them for a couple reasons. For one, I usually make most of my boards, so I'm not going to review a board that you can't buy. I also am not really a big proponent of just like getting gear. I don't usually do that. I have like the same set of trucks that I've been skating for like probably 4 or 5 years. I basically don't skate any wheels that aren't already like tried and tested. I don't really like buy new wheels when they get released. Basically just skate something that's already been tested out. So there's not really much reason for me to review something. So why do I even have this board? Well, the main reason is I can't make this. When I buy wood, it comes in roughly 10-inch wide by 35-inch length. This is a really common size for building skateboards because most people don't build big, long boards. So I can't make anything over 35 inches. I was wanting to buy a board that was that kind of like big free ride, 25-inch wheelbase type single kick. And when you get up in that wheelbase range with a kicktail, you're looking at 37, 38, 39, sometimes even 40 inches long, which I'm not capable of making that. So got to go out and buy it. And you can buy wood that's longer. It's just the wood's more expensive, and I don't know. I like the look of this board anyway, so I figured I'd just buy it. Why did I get this board instead of other kicktail boards? A couple reasons. For one, this board is cheap. It's $155 without shipping, without grip, which is on the cheap side for sure. It's probably one of the best deals when it comes to freeride single kick boards that are out there. Most boards are like 180, 200, even more than that when you get into more advanced composite boards. But that was a big part of it. I also liked the shape, and when I say shape, I really mean the nose. This board actually has a nose. Now we're going to talk more about this later, but there's very few single kicks out there that have a nose, and I guess that would make it a double kick. But outside of like the Clark Pro model from Land Yachts, there's really nobody else with a single kick that also has a little bit of a nose. And I just like really don't like the look of a board that doesn't have even just like a little bit of a nose at the front. I also wanted the board, I love a good 25, 24-inch wheelbase boat. I skate switch a lot, and so having a little extra length really helps, I think, when it comes to skating switch. And I've always liked Earthwing. I always thought Earthwing was a cool brand, very New York roots kind of basis, although now I want to say that their new owner is not based in New York at all. I think from videos I've seen, seems like he's skating in California mostly. But I've always liked Earthwing. They've always made good boards, really well designed. They feel very punk rock, rock and roll. They're always really affordable, and yeah. Go Earthwing. So let's talk about the specs, or at least we'll talk about the advertised specs. We'll start with that. Construction-wise, this is an 8-ply maple wood board with a mystery composite layer. They didn't say what the composite layer was. I believe it's probably fiberglass, because if it was carbon fiber, they definitely tell you that it's carbon fiber. They also don't tell you what kind of fiberglass it is. Don't really know. It's pretty stiff. We'll talk about stiffness in a little bit, but you really have no idea what that layer is or even where that layer is on the board. I'm pretty sure it's underneath the graphics, so the undermost layer of the board, but I can't say for sure. The mounting options are 23 inches at the smallest and then up to 25 inches at the longest, and each one of the wheelbases is at half-inch increments, so the front has 3 different wheelbase options, the back has 3 wheelbase options as well. And one thing to note is that Earthwing always drills their mounting holes at old school mounting, so like if you have like a traditional RKP, like a Paris truck, which is what I have, you will either see the new school, which is the longer, more spaced out bolt pattern, or the slightly smaller traditional bolt pattern, which is also what they do with most street decks. So that's just, that's how they do that. They list the overall width at 9.875 inches wide and the length at 37.5. Like I said, I skated this board exclusively with Paris 165s, 43 degrees symmetrical. I have a board side is a Venom Freeride, which is like their wide cone type thing in the HPF, so the squishy formula at 85A for the board side. And then for roadside, I have a Riptide 90A crank cannon bushing roadside, and that's symmetrical, so front and back are the same. As for wheels, I skated a couple different types of wheels, but honestly, mostly it was just 75A snakes. And I used the all three wheelbases. However, I mostly went with the 24-inch wheelbase, and I'll tell you why in a bit. Well, I'll tell you the 23 is just a little small for me, so I just didn't do that much, but yeah, you can do 23 too. Okay, so let's talk about the actual specs of the board. When I say actual specs, I'm not saying that any of the specs that they gave are not true. They are true. Those listed specs are there. However, there's a lot of other specs of a board that I think are pretty important when I'm trying to find a board, and most board brands do not put this information out. All right, so the front width of this board definitely depends on your wheelbase. And when I am going to measure wheelbase, when I'm going to measure width of a board at the front, you can go by what exactly the wheelbase is at the innermost bolts, because that's where your toe is probably going to go with a board like this. The front of your foot is going to cover, 1 bolt, 2 bolt, probably not 3 bolt, just because that's more of like a slalom geometry type truck, and you're probably not going to ride that on this board. You're probably going to ride reverse kingpin trucks. At the longest out wheelbase, like the furthest out one, the width is only 8.5 inches wide. Pretty dang narrow for a freeride board. And then if you would go to the innermost wheelbase, so it's going to be the widest point of the board due to the taper, you have actually got up to like an 8.9 width. If you were going to mount the board right there. So there's a pretty big difference, almost a whole 1/2 inch difference. So the nose tapers like a ton right here. And at the back of the board, definitely almost no taper in the back. If you're at the furthest out wheelbase in the back, you're looking at just like a clean 9 inches wide. And then when you're actually at the innermost one for the back, you're looking at a 9.1. So almost no difference, probably would not even feel that. And the last width marker that I think is pretty important is where your front heel would go. Most of the time when you stand on the front of a board, most people hold their front foot at roughly like a 45-degree angle, or this way if you're goofy or regular, whatever. But here drastically affects how the board feels. Right here where my front heel goes, and I wear like a size 13 shoe, that would be like a 9.6 inch width. So while yes, the board at its widest is 9.875, it's, to be honest with you, not an important piece of information if the board has any taper at all. So actually listing where your feet are going to go is going to be much more important. The nose of the board is going to be as short as 3.5 inches or 4.5, and the back is going to be either 6.5 inches long or down to 5.5 inches long. So outside of the specs of the board, we're going to talk about like different elements, different parts of the board, and how they work, what I like about them or dislike about them. So as far as the stiffness goes, 8-ply maple with a layer of mystery composite, whatever it is. I think it's fiberglass, I would assume. I don't know if it's bidirectional or triaxial, which makes a pretty big difference. Bidirectional just means that there's a weave of fiberglass going across the board and up and down. Triaxial is really the one that makes the biggest difference in my experience, because it helps increase the torsional rigidity of the board. It's as rigid as I'd ever want a freeride board to be. There's like a little bit of torsional rigidity. It is not easy to make the board rotate in that way. Basically what I'm trying to say is it's good. I wouldn't worry about the stiffness of the board at all. Just don't worry about it. So the overall width of the board, I spent a lot of time talking about the exact specs of like where the board gets wider and where the board gets narrower. This is one of my biggest gripes about the board, because on their website they advertise, and they don't necessarily lie. It's not like they're lying, but it's easy to misread, as I did, that the board is symmetrical concave is what they say. So that is true, meaning that while the concave is symmetrical, the width is not, and because of that, it feels different in the front than it does at the back. Now, if you don't skate a lot of switch, this is really probably not a big deal for you, but when you do skate switch, your back foot, whatever your back foot is, skating switch, is usually going to go pretty much perpendicular to the board. And if you are trying to skate that 25-inch wheelbase, your back foot is sitting at a 8.5-inch wide board, which is really narrow feeling. So because of that, it kind of rendered that 25-inch wheelbase more or less useless. And I thought the board was symmetrical standing platform, but it was symmetrical in concave only. All right, so when it comes to the nose of this board, it is a little guy. And when I say that, I don't mean like the overall length of the nose. It's 3.5 or 4.5 inches wide, depending on your wheelbase choice. It's just the width. Like I've talked about, the board narrows quite a bit at this point where the front bolts are, and it gets even narrower as the board goes towards its more or less point at the nose itself. So it gets kind of useless, not because of the length, but because like all you can fit on the front nose is like the very ball of your foot. So sure, you can do like nose manuals, stuff like that, but it's hard to catch like an ollie or anything like that with that nose. It's just such a tiny little thing. And like I said, I like a nose. I like a kicked nose on a board like this, but I just think that it could be a little wider. Something kind of interesting about this board, or I thought was kind of interesting, is the rails. When you look at the rails, they're like flat. They don't curve at all. Sometimes when you're looking at boards, like I remember old Sector 9 boards used to do this, where they would round the bottom like 4 to 5 plies and really like cut a lot of that wood away there, but it kind of created this really nice rounded underside of the board, and I thought I kind of like that. It's a total matter of taste. This definitely has a really beefy feel to it when you grab it with your hand, so you might prefer that over a more narrow feel. The top rails are sharp, or they were before I flipped the board a bunch of times. They're fairly sharp on top. Now that I actually look at it, they aren't like a razor sharp top rail. Even the spots where like the board didn't hit the ground when I flipped it, they're actually like a tiny bit, maybe not like super sharp like a old rain board or something like that. Definitely not rounded on purpose or anything, but it's almost like the way that they sanded them, they might have cut slightly into the top ply a little bit. Interesting. I didn't really notice that when riding. Really, the grip tape is what's locking you in more than anything. Wheel clearance isn't really something that we need to talk about too much. It's good. The wheel wells are that kind of classic Madrid 3-step, boom, 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 one for each one of your wheel wells, and I'm 90% sure these are made in the same Madrid factory. They just have a lot of the telltale signs of that Madrid type construction and board design, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but like I said, not really worrying about any wheel clearance. I don't think you'd really want to ride any wheels over 75 mil on this anyways, and I wouldn't really be nervous. Flush mounts. There aren't any. There's no flush mounts on this board, which is kind of interesting. I feel like most freeride boards nowadays, unless they're like a race board, pretty much you put flush mounts into this. And it definitely would take away from the beefiness of the board, but the board does feel like it sits a little bit high. I wish they would have put like 1 or 2 plies of flush mounting into the board. I don't think it would hurt the integrity of the construction, like almost at all. Still a lot of beef on this thing. I say beef a lot. And depending on who you are, if you jump off stuff a lot, you might not want flush mounts. So I would rather have them because I think it would add a little bit more of like a floatiness to the slides. But yeah, if you're purchasing this board with the idea that you're gonna like slash this thing on sidewalks, this is definitely not the board to do it. This is more for just like big stand-up slides type of a thing. I rode this board so much on just straight free ride hills, just steep, straight, wide roads, and I think it does pretty good with that. I did try and hit some sidewalks on it and struggled like a decent amount. Even at like a 23-inch wheelbase, it's not quite nimble enough to be hitting stuff that's that narrow, and so I would try and find something a little bit smaller. As far as the graphic on this thing goes, not bad. It's alright. It's not my favorite graphic for sure, but it's alright. They're taking a little bit of a risk here with some of these colors. We got like this red, this blue, some of that like neon yellow, and it has this kind of like graffiti element with the drip of the lettering on the Earthwang lettering here. I think it's a little simple overall, but I do like how maybe there's like a bit of a nod to New York hip-hop culture in this case, where Earthwing is originally a New York-based brand. I don't think it is anymore. But having kind of like that like hip-hop graffiti type thing is kind of cool. I will say I wish that it was maybe a little bit more like New York hardcore or punk inspired more so, but I don't hate it. It didn't really like do anything for me. It didn't really do anything against my likes for the board, but yeah, it's alright. Alright, last up, like what does it feel like to skate this board? Like all boards give you a certain sense of influence and how you end up skating as a skater in the long run. Boards are going to influence the way that you ride. So, I mean, like obvious things is this is a big kick-tailed board. It is just, it's big. It has a big old kicktail, so it's not standing out from a lot of the other ones in that way. However, something that is standing out a little bit is its lack of pockets. It doesn't have any drops in it like a lot of single kick boards have. And those boards, when you have pockets that are that strong, they kind of have an influence on where you stand on the board. There's certain areas that feel like you're supposed to stand there, and there's certain areas where it doesn't feel like you're supposed to stand there. And this works in both ways. It's kind of a pro and a con. Is this board, like, there's no W in the middle, so to add for stiffness, right? And if you're doing like an ollie or something like that and you step onto that W with your front foot, it just like feels garbage. So it feels really good to put your foot right in the middle of the board to set yourself up for jumping off of something. It also feels fine to put your feet right over the trucks. Not going to be as pocketed, locked in as you would feel on like a Prism Theory or something like that. But there's still some flares there. It's relatively simple. Construction-wise, concave-wise, it's pretty cheap. Overall, it feels kind of like a slightly updated Comet in a lot of ways, where it's really simplistic, very rootsy, kind of Matt K, flowy, surfy vibe for sure here. When I was skating this board, because it has so much like creative freedom space, I came to find that I was skating slightly differently. I usually just go with my tried and true stand-up slides, switch skating, stuff like that. But when I was skating this, I did notice that I was trying to find features to hit. I was trying to hit a grass line. I was trying to jump off of something. Doing some things that I wouldn't maybe normally do. So I think this board does inspire a little bit of creativity from the rider, which honestly spices up your sesh quite a bit. So I appreciated that about this board. Because of its lack of drops and simplicity, you can kind of get your feet all over the place. All right, last up. So like, what would I change about this board? It's not a perfect board. No board is. I think it's a pretty good board, but there are some things that I wish it would be different. Number one, front width. I totally wish that the front was more symmetrical with the back as far as standing platform goes. I was kind of bummed when I realized it wasn't. Switch skating can feel kind of awkward on this board because the overall width of the front of the board, so when you're skating, on the switch, your front of the board is the back. You've got your, doing a heel side switch, you've got your back foot perpendicular to the board, and it's like 8.5 inches wide is like pretty freaking narrow. So it feels a little weird and a little icy when doing that kind of a slide. So I wish it was just a little wider. I also think that extra width would add to the usableness of the nose because it'd just be more to stand on. And I also want to say, I feel like the overall width of the board has something to do with how the board pops. Because the board isn't as evenly weighted, like it's back heavy, because there's more width in the back, it has a tendency to not want to level itself out when you're popping the board up, resulting in a really like angled ollie that doesn't really level out as much. It just kind of like pops up. I think this would also help the 25-inch wheelbase, so like maxing the front truck out to be a little more usable. I think it's kind of hard to use it at that wheelbase because the front foot is standing on such a narrow area of the board. And lastly, kind of a nitpick, and I'm not even 100% sure if I actually want to say this, but I think the tail could be a little bit mellower, or it could just be more like that curved type of angle versus just the like straight up angle that you see here. But I feel like there's something to be desired about the tail here and its angle. Might be good though. I don't know. It's hard to know. So yeah, I don't usually do reviews like this very often, but thanks for watching. See ya.